Backup offers, what are they? Should you use them? And how do you get them to work for you? Let's talk about it. I'm Aaron Chadbourne from Demetria's team, the real estate group, and our team has the experience to help you navigate every aspect of the real estate transaction. Sometimes when you're making an offer on a house, you may not be the highest or best offer, and maybe the seller accepts someone else's. Or if you're a seller, maybe you have several offers in hand to look at. You can only accept one, right? Well, yes, you can only go under contract with one buyer. One seller, one buyer for the same piece of property. That's true. But sometimes a seller will ask, would you like to be in a backup position? What that essentially means is the seller is offering a buyer, so maybe the next best offer, if it was close, or maybe the first offer they accepted was cash and the second offer was financed, maybe there was a difference in price. There's a reason why they chose another offer over your offer, but they say, hey, here's the deal. For the terms that you offered, or if you change this one thing or these few things, these terms in your offer, we would put you in first backup position. That means we signed an addendum which outlines that in the event that the offer they accepted falls apart and falls through and doesn't make it to closing, rather than the seller putting it back on the market, they go under contract automatically with you. The backup addendum does a few things. First, it changes a bunch of the dates that go into a contract, because when we write an offer, oftentimes we have date certain, or you'll have a certain number of days to perform. Well, this kind of hits the pause button and says the clock doesn't start ticking until we're actually under contract. And so rather than having a date certain of a closing date, we might say 30 days or 40 days after we become the contract. But it gives you the certainty that the seller's not going to go find other buyers. They're going to just come to you. Now, here's kind of the catch-22. If the house falls apart and goes back on the market, buyers might have more leverage, because buyers taking a look at this property are going to wonder what happened, what fell apart. Now, if it were for a material reason having to do with the house, they discovered something during the inspection, the seller would need to disclose that to you, and that becomes grounds on which you could exit the contract, because something has now changed in the representations. And so as a buyer, you're not obligated to accept that new disclosure. You can still get out of the contract. However, maybe there have been a lot of interested buyers, and there might be another buyer that would be willing to take that backup position. So it's a good position to take. Some buyers get concerned and they say, well, if I commit to a backup position and I'm the backup offer under contract on this house, what happens if I find another house that I want to buy? I don't want to be obligated. That's a good point. The backup addendum that we would sign gives the buyer the option to terminate at any time for any reason or no reason upon written notification to the seller, so long as you haven't yet moved into becoming an operative contract. So oftentimes it's a low risk way to be first in line should that deal fall apart on the terms that you previously agreed to. Now, of course, a lot of things can change. We've seen a volatile interest rate environment where interest rates have gone up suddenly. If those things change and you decide that you want to remove yourself from being in a backup position, as a buyer, again, it just takes written notification to the seller. On the seller side, it's useful to have a backup offer in place because it gives you leverage in negotiating with the deal that you have the first position. Imagine the deal that the seller has accepted has inspection contingencies, and the buyer, the primary buyer that's under contract on the home, tries to negotiate seller concessions. A seller can say, look, here are the things I'm willing to do, but after a certain point, I've got a backup offer, and I'm going to go talk to them, and I'm going to see what they're going to want, and I have a deal. There's another buyer that wants this house. It gives the seller leverage. So there are reasons why it's beneficial to a seller. Now, some sellers will say, no, we'll just put it back on the market. We'll take our chances. Or in the event that we have our primary deal fall apart, we'll call the other people that made offers. Maybe they don't want to do it. And you don't have to. It's a complete choice for any buyer and any seller, whether you want to enter into a backup agreement. But as a seller, it can provide leverage for your primary contract, and it avoids avoids going back to the market that might ask questions about why your deal fell apart. And sometimes they fall apart for no fault of the seller. Sometimes buyers get cold feet, or they didn't know something, or maybe a husband and wife have a disagreement. I've seen people file for divorce while they were under contract to buy a house. Things happen. And so if it's for no fault of the house, no fault of the seller, this is a good way to make sure you know what your lock position is, or if the market conditions are changing. Again, it's a good way to have a sure bet, at least for a short period of time. Now, buyers in a backup position aren't going to hang around forever because their goal is to buy a house or buy a piece of property. So they might not stick around until the end of the transaction. And that's why it's important that we're managing the contingencies of the primary deal that's under contract to know, is it going to fall apart or is it going to stay together? When there's financing involved and we're waiting on appraisals, maybe we won't know that until after, and maybe we'll have lost the backup buyer. But in the event that we have a backup buyer, it does become advantageous to the seller in many cases. And as a buyer, oftentimes it's helpful to secure your place in line and make sure that you're going to have the opportunity to buy this house on the terms that you previously were excited about should the deal fall through. I have a lot of buyers who say, oh, if I had been able to get that house, and they have the one that got away. Well, sometimes a backup offer gives you the option that should something happen, and things do happen, you'll get that house that you missed out on. Is this something that sounds like it's interesting to you? Is it something that you have questions about? We'd love to help, because our team believes in having the strategies that are going to be successful if you're a seller to get you the most money for your house with the least amount of hassle in the shortest period of time, and if you're a buyer to get you the best deal that meets your goals and fits within your financial parameters. So our team would love to help. I'm Aaron Chadbourne at Demetria's team, the Real Estate Group.